There was a list on the table. 15 names. I'd been in the interview room for 2 hours, and I thought I understood why I was there. And then the investigator slid the document across and said, "Can you look at this and tell me if you recognize any of the names?" He said it the way someone says something they already know the answer to. Not unkindly, just flat, informational. The list had 2 columns. Left column, names. Right column, categories. I started at the top. Name I didn't recognize, name I didn't recognize. I read down. Categories on the right side I won't repeat here except to say that some of them were not good categories to be in. Line 8. Left column, my name. Right column, utilized as unwitting witness, corroborating presence. I read it once. I read it again. I looked up at the investigator. He was watching me the way trained observers watch things. Not unkindly, not coldly, just with the quality of attention that files what it sees. He didn't say anything. I looked back at the document. I looked at line 8 for a long time. Unwitting. That's the word. Unwitting means I didn't know. It means I was present in something without understanding what my presence was doing there. It means the column on the right side is the accurate column. I was utilized as an unwitting witness. I was corroborating presence. I did not know this was happening. I've been asking myself for 6 weeks whether that's accurate, whether I didn't know, or whether I didn't look. And I haven't been able to find a clean answer. I'm not sure there is one. Let me back up. Let me tell you how I got there. 6 years ago, I took a job as executive assistant to a senior figure in a mid-sized financial services firm. I'm not going to name the firm. You probably know it by now if you've been following the coverage. And if you haven't been following the coverage, it doesn't matter. The name of the place isn't the thing. The thing is, what it means to work closely with someone for 6 years. What you know about a person after 6 years of managing their calendar, their correspondence, their access, the specific shape of their professional life, when they are at their best, and when they are managing something difficult, and how those 2 states look different from the desk positioned just outside their office door. My desk was positioned just outside his office door. I chose that position in the first week. The floor was open plan. Most of us were out in the main space. But there was a set of desks near the entrance to his suite, and I took one of those because I thought it would be efficient. Easier access when something needed signing, faster communication, fewer steps between a request and its execution. I thought I chose it for efficiency. I'm not examining that anymore. I chose it for efficiency. That's the true thing. But I've thought about what else it meant, being positioned that way, in a context I didn't know I was in. The desk by the door. The person at the desk by the door. I'll come back to this. The job was good. I want to be precise about this because I think it matters. The job was genuinely good. The work was interesting, the compensation was fair, the professional environment was functional, and sometimes more than functional. I was trusted with real responsibility. I handled confidential correspondence, sensitive scheduling, access to information that was not shared with other support staff. I was trusted with this because I was reliable, thorough, and discreet. I was very good at being discreet. I was rewarded for being discreet. I am examining whether being rewarded for something makes it right. Not yet. I'll come back to this too. The office at 9 in the morning had a specific quality I can still reconstruct. The building was old. One of those converted spaces with high ceilings that had been modernized in a way that didn't quite hide what the space used to be. There were exposed beams that someone had decided were a feature. The ventilation system ran through ductwork that you could see, painted the same off-white as the walls. At 9 o'clock, the floor was filling up. Keyboards running, the coffee station occupied, the specific low-grade hum of 20-something people starting their day in the same room. By 7 in the evening, the floor was different. The hum was gone. The overhead lights dimmed to the lower evening setting automatically. The air smelled different. Less coffee, more something settling. The building cooling toward a different temperature than it held during working hours. I knew both states of that building equally well. I worked late often. Not every night, not routinely, but often enough that both versions of the place are equally real to me when I think about it now. The archive started because I'm thorough. That's not an excuse. It's a fact about me. From the first week of the job, I kept paper records. Not everything, but anchor points. Notes from briefings in my own handwriting. Copies of significant correspondence, filed by date and category. Scheduling records with my own marginal notes about context. This is how I function. I like to be able to go back. I liked knowing that if something came up, weeks or months later, I had the record to refer to. 6 years of that is a lot of paper. When I left the position, I left voluntarily. 3 days after the arrest, nobody asked me to leave. I brought the archive home in a planned, organized transfer. Labeled boxes. Specific categories. I had a system. I have always had a system. What I did not have, when I packed those boxes and carried them into my spare room and stacked them against the wall, was any idea that I would be sitting in that spare room 6 weeks later going through them backwards, starting from the most recent and working toward the beginning, trying to find what I missed, or what I chose not to look at. I have been trying to establish which of those two things is accurate, and I keep finding that the distinction is harder to draw than it ought to be. He was good at his job. I think this matters to say. Whatever he did and whatever the investigation finds and whatever happens in the legal proceedings that are still ongoing, separate from all of that, he was genuinely skilled. He was precise about things that required precision. He was strategic in a way that I found educational. He understood the shape of what he was doing and why it would work, and watching that was interesting. I learned things from 6 years of proximity to how he operated. I want to be honest about this. The fact that some of what he was operating was fraud does not retroactively make everything else less than what it was. It makes it complicated. I'm learning to hold complicated things. The first week I found something in the archive, I was looking at documents from 2 years ago. The year the investigators had identified as key, the period when certain transactions occurred, when certain structures were built and put in motion. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was working through the boxes in order, reading everything, noting what I found. The document was a routine countersignature. I had countersigned it in my capacity as authorized assistant. This was within my role, a normal part of managing correspondence for someone with as much outgoing paperwork as he had. The content looked standard, a transaction confirmation with a set of secondary signatories. I'd processed it and moved on. The way I processed hundreds of things and moved on. Moving on was how I did my job well. Moving on was efficient. Looking at it 2 years later, I could see the structure differently. It wasn't complicated once I understood what I was looking at. The document had been designed so that my countersignature would read, to someone reviewing it later, as more than an administrative function. In the context of the other documents around it, which I was now also looking at, my signature functioned as a corroboration. As if I had reviewed the content and confirmed it. As if I had been a knowing witness to the transaction. I hadn't reviewed the content in that way. I had countersigned because I was asked to. It was within my role. I processed it and moved on. I put the document to the side in its own pile, separate from the boxes. I wrote in my notebook, I did not read this carefully. It was not my job to read it carefully. I do not know if I should have read it more carefully. I sat with those 3 sentences for a while. Then I kept working. I countersigned hundreds of documents in 6 years. It was routine. I processed it and moved on because moving on was how I did my job well. I'm going back through every one of them now, one at a time, looking at each one the way you look at something when you're not sure what you're looking at. It's the slowest I've ever worked. I'm not sure slow is wrong. I'm not sure I have another option. The thing about being thorough, the thing I'm still figuring out, is what you're being thorough about. I was thorough about the execution, the tasks, the correspondence, the scheduling, the filing, the management of his professional life. I maintained complete records. I was meticulous about my own work. I was being thorough in the direction of task completion, and I was very good at it, and I think it is genuinely possible to be very thorough in one direction and to not be looking in the other directions at all. I don't know if that's a defense. I'm holding it as a question. The second thing I found was a scheduled meeting. This took me longer to understand. The first document had a structure that became clear once I saw it: the placement of my signature in a specific functional context. The meeting took more sitting with. It was a client coordination meeting. Routine purpose, routine attendees. I had scheduled it in my normal capacity, received the request, found the time, sent the confirmations, noted it in the calendar. This was a significant portion of my daily work: scheduling, coordinating, making the logistics work. I had my notes from the briefing where I'd been asked to set it up. I always kept notes from briefings: date, time, who asked, what for, any specific requirements. My notes on this one said, client meeting, specific attendees listed, needs to be before the end of the month, prefer late in the week. Standard. I scheduled it for a Thursday, third Thursday of the month, late afternoon. What I understood now, looking at the surrounding documents, was that the Thursday placement was specific. Not just end of month, not just late in the week. After a particular transaction closed. Before a regulatory review that had been scheduled and then rescheduled to the following week. A window of approximately 6 days. The meeting, scheduled on the Thursday, fell in the middle of that window. The meeting created a paper trail. A legitimate business activity, documented, involving named participants, time-stamped in my scheduling system with my login. A demonstration of normal operations during a period when a demonstration of normal operations was useful. I scheduled it efficiently, as I was asked to. I noted the preferences: end of month, late in the week. I found the Thursday. I sent the confirmations. I did not ask why the end of the month mattered. I did not ask why late in the week. Asking why the timing preferences were what they were was not my job. I was the scheduler. I scheduled. That was my job. That was my job sounds like a defense. I'm not sure it's a defense. I'm not sure it isn't. I've been holding this question for 6 weeks, and I'm going to keep holding it until I find what it actually is. Because labeling it a defense without knowing if it's accurate would be as dishonest as using it as one. There's a specific experience that comes with looking at your own work and seeing it in a context you didn't know about. I've tried to describe it to my attorney, and she understood it professionally, in the way that attorneys understand things. I've tried to describe it to myself, in my notes, late at night, and I haven't found the right language yet. The nearest I can get, it's like reading a document you wrote in a language you thought you were fluent in, and realizing that in the language the document was actually written in, the words mean something different. Not opposite, not wrong, just operating in a different register, serving a different purpose, doing something you didn't intend because you didn't know there was another language running underneath the one you were using. I processed the documents. I scheduled the meetings. I countersigned in my authorized capacity. I did all of this correctly, in the language I was using. In the language running underneath, my correct, documented, reliable work was doing something else. The third thing I found was the email and the notes together. I should explain the note system first. When he gave me content for correspondence that would be sent in his name, which happened regularly, as it does in any senior executive role, I took handwritten notes. Not transcription, just anchors. Key points. The substance of what he wanted the communication to say. These notes let me write the draft without having to interrupt him with clarification questions. Efficient. I used these notes to produce the first draft. He would review, we would revise if needed, and it would go. I found the notes from a briefing 2 years ago. 2 pages, my handwriting, dated at the top in my usual format. I found the email that resulted in the same section of the archive, a routine correspondence document, sent under his authorization, with my usual processing trail. I put them side by side on my desk. I read them. My hands were flat on the desk, one on each side, the notes on the left and the email on the right. I read each one twice. Then I looked at the gap. The notes said, ongoing review suggests current methodology remains within acceptable range. The email said, ongoing review confirms current methodology is fully compliant, suggests, confirms, within acceptable range, fully compliant. The notes were hedged. The email was definitive. The notes were what I was given. The email was what was sent. I don't know which version is mine. It's possible I wrote confirms and fully compliant in the draft because he often used more definitive language in final correspondence than in the briefing, and I sometimes anticipated this in the draft because I knew his preferences. It's possible he changed it in the review. It's possible I wrote his version and he didn't need to change it. I genuinely cannot determine which version of this is true. The memory isn't there, not as a gap I can feel, just genuinely not there. It was a routine document in a routine workflow in a week I didn't know I would need to remember. I've tried to remember for 6 weeks. I've tried every approach I know. Reconstructing the surrounding days from other calendar records. Reading adjacent correspondence for any context that might anchor the memory. Sitting quietly and not trying, the way you sometimes retrieve something by leaving it alone. Nothing. The gap between what I was given and what was sent is a gap I cannot close. It might be mine. I might have written his version so fluently, so automatically, because I knew how he wrote and could write that way myself, that I made the gap and it didn't register as a gap at all. Or he made it in the review, and I filed the sent version and moved on without noting the difference. Both are possible. I cannot determine which is true. I filed this in my pile. I photographed both documents before putting them away, so I had copies outside the main archive. I wrote in my notebook, cannot determine, include in record. Both versions of the gap belong to the investigation, not to my own assessment of what I did. I'm filing this not as a defense but as what it is, a gap I can't close. That belongs in the record along with everything else. The second meeting with the investigator was 3 weeks after the first. I brought the 3 things I'd found, the countersigned document, the scheduled meeting record, and the email and notes placed together in a single folder with a sheet explaining what I was looking at and why I couldn't resolve it. I presented them in order. He asked questions that were precise, and I answered precisely. He took notes. The room was the same room as the first meeting, the specific flat neutrality of a government building interior, a table, fluorescent light, a water carafe nobody ever touched. I'd noticed a scuff mark on the wall on the left side in the first meeting, and it was still there in the second one. He asked, "Is there anything you'd like to change in your initial statement?" I had known this question was coming, or something like it. I had been preparing my answer for 3 weeks, which is to say I had been living with the answer for 3 weeks, and I had written it out twice and thrown both versions away, and I was going to say what I was going to say without a written version, because the written versions felt like performance, a real moment, not a performed hesitation. I thought about it. I said, yes, there is a phrase in my initial statement that I want to change. The statement says I had no knowledge of the fraud. What I wanted to say is, I cannot confirm that I looked with sufficient attention to have acquired knowledge. He looked at me for a moment. I explained the distinction. I said, I believe the first version is accurate as a statement about what I consciously knew. I believe the second version is more honest about the conditions under which I was operating. I want the record to carry both of these things, not just one of them. He said, that's a meaningful distinction. I said, I know. He wrote it down. That was the turn. I've been thinking about it as that since it happened. The moment when I stopped telling the story that was accurate and started telling the story that was true. They are not the same story. The first version, no knowledge of the fraud, is accurate. I didn't know. I am not a suspect. The investigators have been clear about this from the beginning. That version passes every factual test. The second version is harder. The second version asks whether I was paying attention in a way that I should have been, given my position and my access and my 6 years of proximity to his professional life. It asks whether efficient processing in the absence of curiosity is a form of not looking. It doesn't answer the question. It puts the question into the record. I changed one phrase in a formal legal document. I have never done anything harder. The Friday evening. It was the 4th year of the job. He asked me to stay late. This happened 2 or 3 times a year, a specific urgent piece of correspondence that needed to be completed before Monday. I always accommodated this without resentment. The job was good, the compensation was fair. He was respectful about asking, always a specific request, always an acknowledgement that he understood it required something from me, Never assumed. We worked. I drafted, he reviewed, I redrafted. The rhythm we'd developed over 4 years, which ran well. The work was done by 7:30. He said, "Stay, have some dinner. I'll order from the place you like." He knew what I liked. This was the kind of attention he paid. Not ostentatiously, he just noticed things and remembered them. He did this with everyone he worked closely with. I had seen him do it. I thought it was a quality of attention that good leaders have, and I still think that's partially true. I'm not able to make it less true, because I now know other things. Things that are true even when they sit next to other things that are also true, and that change the shape of everything. We ate at the conference table. The files were set aside. It was casual in the way that 4 years of professional proximity allows you to be casual. He asked about my mother, who had been having health difficulties for several months. I'd mentioned it once, briefly, and he'd filed it. He asked with what felt like genuine care, not performed, the real kind, which lands differently and which you can usually identify. He asked about the community theater project. I'd mentioned this months ago, in passing, and he'd remembered it. He said, "You are exactly the kind of person that every professional environment needs." He said, "I am lucky you chose this office." I drove home that evening feeling valued. I know the difference between valued and flattered. I've always known the difference. On that Friday evening, I believed I was valued, and I believed I knew what I was talking about. I've thought about this evening more than any other single thing in the past 6 weeks. I've turned it over in every direction I can think of, and what I keep coming back to is this. I cannot make him have valued me less than he did. I cannot do it. The care was real. I could feel real care by that point in my career, and I know what it feels like, and I felt it. He valued me. He also found my value useful. He also understood what my reliability and my credibility and my 6 years of documented thoroughness could do, in a context I didn't know I was in. He valued me, and he found that value useful. And these two things are not mutually exclusive. And I am at my desk at 3 in the morning, and both of them are true, and I cannot separate them. Here is the 3 o'clock dark. I'd been in the spare room for 5 hours. The last box was open on the table. I was not looking for more anomalies. I'd found what I was going to find. I was sitting with it. 6 years of efficient processing. 6 years of anchor point notes and meticulous filing and moving forward. I was very good at it. I was rewarded for it. Moving forward, not dwelling. Keeping the workflow clean and the communication precise. This is how I functioned, and it was how I functioned well, and the functioning well was what made my presence useful to something I didn't know I was present in. Not because I was corrupt. I wasn't corrupt. I processed things correctly. I did not falsify anything. I did not knowingly participate. I was not informed of what was happening, and I was utilized specifically because I was not informed. The column on the right side of that list is accurate. Unwitting. I was unwitting. And I am sitting in the 3 o'clock dark asking myself what it means to be thorough only in the direction of task completion and not in the direction of context. What it means to be precise about the execution and not about the question of what you're executing in service of. Whether those two kinds of attention are separable when you are in a position of proximity. Whether the fact that asking contextual questions was not in my job description absolves me of the question of whether I should have asked them. I'm not performing guilt I haven't earned. I want to be clear about this. I've been accused in my own head, the private version, the 3 o'clock version, of performing guilt because it's more palatable than accepting that I simply didn't know, more active, more bearable. I've checked this against what I actually find when I read back through the archive. I find things I should have questioned. I find a quality of incuriosity that, in a context that deserved curiosity, is its own kind of choice. Whether it's a culpable choice, legally, morally, in some register I can actually name, I can't tell you. I'm still working that out. What I think I find in the honest version, I had a professional practice of efficient non-questioning. I was good at it and I was rewarded for it, and it did not occur to me to ask whether I was being good at something that had a shadow side I wasn't examining. I was 34 and I had 6 years of successful professional performance behind me, and I thought that successful performance meant I was doing something right. Successful performance can be doing something right. It can also be doing something right within a structure you don't know is wrong. I didn't examine the structure. I processed it and moved forward. 3 categories. I've been using these as a way to think about it. What I knew: the tasks, the correspondence, the scheduling, the surface of 6 years of professional work done correctly. I knew all of this fully. This is the category that is clean. What I witnessed: his daily professional life, the meetings, the correspondence, the relationships, the Friday evening, the shape of how he operated, which I observed from the desk positioned just outside the door. I witnessed this for 6 years, and I interpreted it as what it appeared to be: successful operation, good judgment, someone working at the level he was supposed to be working at. This is the category where I keep asking whether I should have seen something different. I keep not finding a clean answer. What I gave without understanding what I was giving: my signature, my scheduling, my professional presence and credibility. 6 years of demonstrated reliability, documented and time-stamped and structured into a paper trail that served a purpose I didn't know it was serving. I gave this freely. I gave it because it was asked for in ways that appeared legitimate, and were legitimate in all the forms I was checking. It was taken in a direction I didn't choose and didn't consent to, and didn't know about. This 3rd category is the one I can't resolve. It sits at the desk with me at 3 in the morning. I gave it. It was used. I didn't know. These 3 things are all true, and they don't add up to a clean answer, and I've accepted that they're not going to. I closed the last box. I turned off the screen. I sat in the dark for a while, not doing anything, not thinking particularly, just sitting in the specific heaviness of having finished with the question and found that the question doesn't finish. Then I went to bed. His legal representative contacted my attorney 6 weeks after I submitted my revised statement. The message was professional, brief. Would I be willing to speak with him? The decision was entirely mine. I thought about it for 4 days. I didn't perform the deliberation. I actually thought about it, the way I think about things that matter, which is to sit with the full weight of both sides until I can see them clearly. Reasons to say yes. I might get the answer about the email. Suggests versus confirms. I might learn whether I made the gap or he made it. There is a specific open question in my archive that would close if he answered it honestly, which is not the same as saying he would answer it honestly, but the possibility is there. I might find out what the Friday evening was, in his account of it, which is not the same as what it was, but it is a version of it. Reasons to say no. I would have to decide whether to believe what he said. I would be sitting across from someone skilled at shaping what other people perceived, and I would have to assess in real time what was accurate and what was constructed for my benefit. I've done this. I have 6 years of watching him do this, watching him present things the way he wanted them seen, and I am not confident I could make that determination reliably. I was not reliable at it when I trusted him completely. I don't know why I would be reliable at it now that I don't. Also, I have accepted the open questions as open questions. I have found a way to carry the things I cannot resolve. If I go into that conversation looking for closure and come out with an answer I can't verify, I don't know if I'm in a better position. I don't know if I'm in a worse one. I know that I spent 6 years in professional proximity to a person and trusted my read of him and was wrong about something significant, and that my confidence in my own judgment in relation to him is specifically the thing I can't rely on. I declined the meeting. I didn't explain my reasoning to my attorney. She noted it in the record and we moved on. I prepared the final statement over 2 weeks. It was more than I was required to give. The investigators had been clear about what they needed: the documents, the specific events I could corroborate, my account of the counter-signature and the scheduled meeting, and the email with the gap. That was the scope of what was being asked. I gave them all of that. Then I gave them the section I wrote and rewrote 3 times. The section is about professional practice, about what it means to be efficient in a role that exists close to decision-making, about the difference between thoroughness and the direction of execution and thoroughness and the direction of context. I do not say I was negligent. I do not say I was complicit. I say that I had a practice of not asking questions that were not in my job description, that I was professionally rewarded for this practice, and that I believe this practice, applied in the specific context of this role, is something the record should contain as a question, not as an answer, as a question I am unable to resolve for myself, and that I therefore submit to the record as unresolved. I wrote at the end of that section, I cannot answer this question, but I believe it belongs here. The investigator read the full statement at our last meeting. The room was the same room. The scuff mark on the wall was still there. He read in silence for a long time. He looked up. He said, "This is thorough." I said, "I try." He said it again, differently, after a pause, in a way I understood to mean something more than a professional observation. I didn't answer. I'm not sure what the answer would have been. I took a break from work. I don't call it that in my own language. I was actively searching for the next position, maintaining my professional contacts, preparing the portfolio that would establish me outside the affected network. I was working, but I was also using the time differently than I'd used any work-adjacent time in the previous 6 years, which is to say, I was using it to sit with things instead of processing them and moving on. I was thinking about what I wanted my professional practice to look like, what thoroughness means, whether thoroughness can be a value you hold while applying it only in certain directions, whether the fact that a question falls outside your job description is a sufficient reason not to ask it when you're the person positioned to ask it. I don't have answers. I have the questions with more weight in them than they had before. 4 months after I left, I took a new contract. Smaller scope than the previous role. I went in with my system, the notes, the archive practice, the efficient processing that is genuinely how I function, and that I'm not going to stop doing because it was used in a context I didn't know about. The first week there was a piece of correspondence being drafted for my new employer that involved a secondary party I didn't recognize. Not my question, not my job. Adjacent to my role. I asked the question. I said, I want to make sure I understand the full context for this correspondence. Can you give me a bit more background on this party and what the relationship is? A 1-minute question. A 2-minute answer. The answer was entirely unremarkable. The party was a routine vendor with a routine relationship, and the correspondence was exactly what it appeared to be. Nothing was wrong. I noted in my own records that I'd asked. I noted that nothing was wrong. I continued. I don't know yet if this is the right practice. I don't know how to calibrate the additional question, when it's warranted, when it's excessive, when I'm seeing structures that aren't there because I spent 6 weeks looking for them everywhere. I don't know if the version of me that asks one extra question is more reliable than the version that processed and moved on. I am trying to find out. The notes from the briefing 2 years ago are in a folder in my desk. A photocopy, the originals went to the investigators. 2 pages of my handwriting, recording what I was given to work with. The gap on the right side in the sent version that says confirms where my notes say suggests, that says fully compliant where my notes say within acceptable range. The gap I cannot close. I don't look at it often. I know it's there. I know it will always be there as a question that doesn't close because the person who could close it is not someone I'm willing to ask, and the part of my own memory that might close it is genuinely not accessible to me. I've accepted both of these things. There's a version of this story where I have an answer, where the investigation concludes and I learn exactly what I knew and didn't know, and the question of whether I looked or chose not to look is resolved into one clean finding. I was unwitting, or I was insufficient, or I was something with a name that would tell me what I am. I don't have that version. What I have is the question, carried forward, into the new contract and the one extra question practice, and the archive that I'm still maintaining because thoroughness is what I have, and I'm not done deciding what to do with it. I was utilized as unwitting witness. That's what the column says. I've been sitting with unwitting for 6 weeks, turning it over, asking whether it's the full truth or whether it's the convenient truth, or whether convenient and full can describe the same thing. What I found so far is this. I was unwitting about the fraud. I was also incurious in ways that I'm still measuring. Both of these things live in the same column. The column says unwitting, and it's not wrong, and it's not the whole story. And I'm the one who has to carry the difference between those two things because nobody else is going to carry it for me, and because carrying it honestly is the most accurate thing I know how to do.